The silence is strange because it is not empty. It sits there on your phone like a small, hard object you keep touching without meaning to. You tell yourself you are not waiting, and yet a part of your body still listens. Not just your mind, your body. The shoulders that tighten when the screen lights up, the stomach that drops when it does not. The way you can be in the middle of your day and still feel a private little pause inside you, as if one message could change the weather. That is where this begins. Not with his words, but with the space between them. And maybe that space has been asking something from you for longer than you wanted to admit. Maybe you have been carrying his confusion, as if it were a suitcase you were supposed to hold for him. Maybe you have been translating his mixed signals, softening his distance, explaining his inconsistency, making room for his uncertainty like it was a fragile thing that needed your patience to survive. You became the place where his lack of clarity could rest. You became the one who made it make sense. But this is where the cost begins. Because when you keep making his confusion your responsibility, you slowly stop noticing your own clarity. You begin to live in reaction to his moods, his delays, his half-answers, his almosts. You look at a silent phone and start building a story around it. You look at a delayed reply and ask what you did wrong. You look at his warmth one day and his distance the next, and instead of seeing a pattern, you start seeing a puzzle that only your love can solve. That is how the trap works. Not through cruelty at first, through hope, through interpretation, through the exhausting belief that if you just understand him well enough, you will finally feel safe. Carl Jung would have recognized something important here, not because he would reduce a living person to a label, but because he understood how easily we fall in love with what we project. We do not only respond to the person in front of us, we respond to the image we have placed onto them, the meaning we have built around them, the emotional story our unconscious has attached to their face, their silence, their return, their absence. Sometimes we think we are chasing a man, but what we are really chasing is the relief of finally being chosen, finally being seen, finally being made whole by someone else's certainty. And that is why his confusion becomes so powerful, because it leaves room for projection. When someone is unclear, the mind rushes in to complete the picture. It fills the gaps, it writes the missing lines, it turns fragments into fate. A delayed response becomes hidden longing, a cold message becomes fear, a disappearing act becomes a test, a vague apology becomes proof that he cares, just not enough to know how to show it. Maybe some of that is true, maybe some of it is not. But the deeper point is this: confusion is fertile ground for fantasy. And fantasy can feel like connection when the heart is hungry. You know this feeling. The quiet hours, the replaying, the little negotiations inside your mind. If he meant nothing, why did he come back? If he cared, why did he leave it like this? If he is confused, should I be patient? Should I give him more time? Should I say less? Should I say one more thing, just enough to keep the door open without looking desperate? You can spend weeks in that mental room, sometimes longer. The walls are invisible, but they are still walls. And here is the part most people do not want to hear. The more you take responsibility for his confusion, the less accountable he has to be for it. That is a hard sentence, because it takes away a comforting illusion. It says that your understanding may have been doing work that his honesty should have done. Your empathy may have been covering for his avoidance. Your patience may have been protecting his indecision from consequences. You were not only loving him, you were managing the emotional consequences of his lack of clarity. That is not love at its highest. That is self-abandonment in a beautiful dress. And if that stings, it is because some part of you already knew. Maybe you have been the woman who can tell when someone is withdrawing before they admit it. You feel the shift in tone before you can prove it. You sense the distance before it has a name. You notice the cooling of a voice, the thinning of effort, the way someone begins to answer just enough to avoid being called absent. So you step in. You soften. You ask the right question. You make space. You become more understanding, more patient, more available. Because if you can keep the atmosphere calm enough, perhaps nothing will break. But something already has. Not necessarily the relationship. Sometimes the thing that breaks first is your trust in yourself. This is where Jung becomes more than an idea. He becomes a mirror. Because what he called the persona is not only a mask we wear for the world, it is also the role we learn to survive inside. Maybe your persona has been the understanding woman, the easy woman, the one who does not demand too much, does not ask too directly, does not make things heavy, the one who can read between the lines and carry what others cannot say, the one who makes emotional chaos look graceful. People praise that kind of woman. They call her mature, they call her kind, they call her low maintenance, easy to love, safe to be around. And sometimes those words are true, but sometimes they are also a cage. Because when your identity is built around being the one who can handle anything, you become dangerously available for other people's unresolved mess. They do not have to become clearer if you are willing to become more flexible. They do not have to confront themselves if you are willing to keep guessing. They do not have to choose if you are willing to stay in the waiting room and call it love. This is how the persona protects the relationship while quietly harming the self. And there is usually a shadow underneath it. Jung's shadow is not evil. It is the part of you that has been pushed aside, denied, or made unacceptable. In this situation, the shadow may be your anger, your refusal, your dignity, your simple, clean no. The part of you that knows you should not have to decode someone who wants access to you. The part of you that is tired of being emotionally responsible for a man who has not earned that level of care. But because that part feels sharp, you may have learned to distrust it. You may call it cold. You may call it harsh. You may call it too much. So you send it away and keep the softer parts in front. You become understanding again, available again, open again. Yet the shadow does not disappear. It waits. And one day it returns not as rage, but as fatigue. That fatigue is important. It is not laziness. It is not bitterness. It is the body telling the truth your mind has been editing. You are tired because you have been holding someone else's ambiguity in your nervous system. You are tired because every unanswered message has become a tiny emotional task. You are tired because you have been acting as if his confusion is a problem you can solve by being more loving. But love cannot replace clarity. It can only reveal where clarity is missing. Think about how often confusion is treated like a temporary phase when, in reality, it is a pattern. He says one thing and does another. He reaches out when he feels distance, then retreats when closeness appears. He wants the comfort of your presence without the responsibility of your expectation. He wants to be understood without having to understand himself. He wants the benefits of emotional access without the burden of emotional maturity. And if you are honest, you may have been helping him maintain that arrangement. Not because you are naive, because you are loyal, because you can feel what is unspoken, because you know how to keep a door open, because your heart wants to believe that if you stay gentle enough, the truth will eventually emerge. Sometimes it does, but sometimes the truth is already there, and what you are really resisting is the shape of it. The shape of it may be simple. He is confused. He is avoidant. He is emotionally inconsistent. He is not ready. He is not choosing you in the way you need to be chosen. He may care and still not be capable. He may feel and still not act. He may think about you and still not know how to meet you with the kind of presence that would make the connection safe. That distinction matters, because once you stop turning confusion into hidden devotion, you can see the situation more cleanly, and clarity changes everything. It does not make the pain vanish. It does not instantly make you indifferent, but it stops the endless self-interrogation. It stops the habit of assuming that his uncertainty must be a reflection of your worth. It stops the old reflex of making his inner weather your forecast. This is where projection begins to loosen. Projection is one of those words that sounds abstract until you feel it in your chest. It means we place parts of our own inner world onto another person, and then react as if they are the source of what we are feeling. We see in them what our unconscious is ready to see. We fall in love not only with who they are, but with the image of what they might resolve in us. We fear them not only for what they do, but for what they awaken. So when his confusion hooks you, it may not only be because he is unclear, It may be because his uncertainty touches an old place in you that already knows what it feels like to wait for emotional stability from someone else. Maybe you learned early that love comes with mixed messages. Maybe attention was inconsistent. Maybe you had to read the room, read the face, read the tone, and make yourself smaller or softer to keep connection alive. If that is true, then a confusing man does not just feel frustrating, he feels familiar. And familiarity can masquerade as chemistry. That is a painful truth, but it is also a liberating one. Because if the pattern is familiar, it can be seen. And if it can be seen, it can be interrupted. The interruption often begins with a moment that looks small from the outside. You stop explaining. You stop over-clarifying. You stop asking the same question in 10 different ways. You stop trying to make him comfortable with the consequences of his own vagueness. You stop sending the message that says, in so many hidden forms, I can hold this for you if you cannot hold it for yourself. And then something strange happens. The air changes. Sometimes the other person notices. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes they reach out. Sometimes they retreat further. Sometimes they become more confused because your old role has disappeared and they no longer know how to place you. But the real change is not in them. It is in you. The room inside you becomes less crowded. There is more space where his interpretation used to live. More silence, but a different kind. Not the silence of waiting, the silence of reclaiming. That is why the image of the silent phone matters so much. At first, the phone feels like proof of absence, proof of importance, proof of being forgotten or remembered or suspended in between. But later, if you let it, the same phone becomes a symbol of a deeper question. Why did I give a device this much power over my nervous system? Why did I let a screen decide whether I felt chosen, valued, or real? The answer is rarely shallow. It is usually tied to a complex. Jung used that word to describe emotionally charged knots in the psyche, places where old pain and present experience fuse together. A complex does not mean you are broken. It means a particular situation has found a nerve that was already sensitive. His confusion may have touched an abandonment complex, if you have one. Not because you are weak, but because some part of you learned long ago that uncertainty equals danger, that waiting equals love, that being patient might win what direct asking cannot, that if you are good enough, calm enough, understanding enough, the other person will eventually settle into certainty. But this is where the pattern becomes cruel. The more you try to earn clarity from someone who is not offering it freely, the more you train yourself to live without it. And living without clarity does something to the soul. It creates internal fog. It makes you doubt your own perception. It turns your intuition into a courtroom where every feeling has to be defended. You begin to ask whether you are overreacting, whether you are too sensitive, whether you are expecting too much. You start to apologize for wanting something simple: consistency, honesty, presence. You should not have to apologize for that. A man can be confused, that is human, but you do not have to make his confusion your home. There is a difference between compassion and participation. Compassion says, I can see you are struggling. Participation says, I will keep carrying the struggle with you so you do not have to face it. One is humane, the other is costly, and it is costly in ways that are not always obvious at first. You may become more tired, more anxious, more distracted. Your work may feel heavier. Your sleep may become thinner. Your body may hold the tension in places you do not immediately connect to the relationship: the jaw, the chest, the stomach, the throat. Sometimes the body knows the emotional truth before the mind is willing to name it. That is why you can feel a strange relief the moment you stop chasing the explanation. Not because you stopped caring, because your body finally stops bracing for the next emotional swing. This is the part most people avoid. What if his confusion is not a mystery to solve, but a boundary to respect? That question changes the entire dynamic, because respect is not the same as tolerance. You can respect that someone is not ready without volunteering to become the holding container for their indecision. You can respect that someone has a divided inner world without letting that division define your emotional life. You can even care deeply and still step back from the role of interpreter, rescuer, emotional translator, and silent witness to your own depletion. And when you do step back, guilt often arrives. Guilt is one of the most misunderstood signals in relationships. Sometimes it is a moral alarm. Sometimes it is a conditioning response. Sometimes it is the nervous system protesting the loss of an old role. If you were trained to be the one who smooths everything over, then a boundary may feel like wrongdoing before it feels like freedom. That does not mean the boundary is wrong. It means your psyche is adjusting. The first time you stop making his confusion your responsibility, you may feel almost cruel. You may want to rush back into the familiar role, just to relieve the discomfort. You may want to send one more message, one more clarification, one more gentle opening. But pause there. Notice what is happening. Is this love speaking, or is it the old reflex of managing someone else's emotional instability so you can keep the peace? Peace built on self-erasure is not peace. It is postponement. And postponement has a way of becoming identity if you stay too long. This is why Jung's idea of individuation matters here. Individuation is not becoming isolated or superior. It is the process of becoming more fully yourself, less split, less ruled by unconscious patterns, less dependent on external approval for inner orientation. In plain language, it means you stop outsourcing your center. You stop asking, "What does his confusion mean about me?" And you begin asking, "Why am I willing to live inside confusion to keep this connection alive?" That question is uncomfortable, but it is healing, because it returns the focus to the only place where real change can happen, your own relationship to yourself. Maybe you realize that part of what kept you attached was not only love, but the hope of being the one person who could finally make someone stay emotionally present. Maybe you wanted to be the exception, the woman who could be patient enough, soft enough, wise enough, beautiful enough, safe enough to dissolve his uncertainty. That hope is understandable. It is human. But it can also become a trap if it makes you responsible for a transformation that belongs to another adult soul. You cannot love clarity into someone who prefers ambiguity. You cannot carry someone into emotional maturity by being endlessly available to their immaturity. You cannot become smaller and call it devotion. There is a moment, and maybe you have already touched it, when the pain changes shape. It stops feeling like heartbreak alone and starts feeling like self-recognition. You see the pattern. You see the role. You see how often you have been the one who keeps the story alive, while someone else keeps the distance alive. And in that moment, something in you gets very quiet. Not numb, quiet. That quiet is powerful. It is the beginning of a different kind of dignity. Because dignity does not shout. It does not beg to be understood. It does not chase the person who is half present. It does not try to negotiate with confusion, as if confusion were a contract. Dignity says, "I can care about you and still require clarity." Dignity says, "I am not available for a relationship where I must constantly translate what should be direct." Dignity says, "My empathy does not cancel my standards." This is not coldness, it is structure. And structure is what the psyche needs when it has been floating too long in emotional uncertainty. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself somewhere tonight. Not for him, for you. Something simple and true. Maybe it is, "I am no longer responsible for what he refuses to clarify." Maybe it is, "I can care without carrying." Maybe it is, "His confusion is not my assignment." Maybe it is, "I do not need to earn certainty by becoming smaller." Let it be plain. Let it be yours. Because the sentence you write for yourself can become a boundary. And the boundary is not there to punish anyone. It is there to stop the bleed. That is what many people misunderstand about distance. They think distance is a strategy, a tactic, a way to make someone feel your absence and come closer. But if you are honest, the deepest form of distance is not strategic at all. It is psychological. It is the moment you no longer volunteer your inner life to be shaped by someone else's indecision. When you stop making his confusion your responsibility, you begin to see how much of your energy was going into maintenance. maintenance of the mood, maintenance of the connection, maintenance of the fantasy that if you just stayed tender enough, the situation would eventually become what you hoped it was. But hope without reality can become a slow erosion. So now the question changes. Not, what is he thinking? Not, will he finally choose me? Not, how do I make this make sense? The question becomes, what in me was so willing to stay in the dark? And that question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. Maybe the answer is that you were loyal to the person you were in the story, the patient one, the understanding one, the woman who could hold emotional contradiction without breaking. But there comes a point when loyalty to that role becomes disloyalty to your own life. That is the threshold. Crossing it does not make you harsh, it makes you honest. And honesty is often what the unconscious has been trying to bring you toward all along. Not with perfect timing, not with a neat little lesson, usually through discomfort, repetition, disappointment, and the slow collapse of a fantasy that was never going to feed you. Sometimes the unconscious speaks through dreams, sometimes through exhaustion, sometimes through a man who cannot give you what you keep trying to explain away, sometimes through the body's refusal to keep pretending. The deeper wisdom here is simple, even if it takes time to live it. Confusion in another person does not obligate you to confusion in yourself. You are allowed to step out of the fog. You are allowed to let his unclear behavior be unclear without building a cathedral around it. You are allowed to stop reading tea leaves in texts. You are allowed to stop treating inconsistency like a hidden language of love. You are allowed to stop making his inner conflict the center of your emotional calendar. And if there is love here, real love, it will not require your self-abandonment to survive. That is the test. Not whether he is perfect, not whether he knows exactly what he wants every second, not whether he has wounds, fears, defenses, or a complicated inner life. Everyone does. The test is whether the connection asks you to betray your own clarity in order to remain inside it. If it does, then something is off. If it does not, then there is room for truth. Truth may still include distance. It may still include grief. It may still include the loss of a dream you had to put down gently. But grief is cleaner than confusion. Grief tells the truth. Confusion keeps you circling. And circles can look like devotion when they are really exhaustion. So let the circle break. Let the phone stay silent for a while without turning it into a verdict. Let his confusion belong to him. Let your responsibility return to where it belongs. Let your energy come home to your own center. That is where the real shift happens, not in the other person's mind, but in your relationship to your own presence. You start to feel the difference between compassion and overfunctioning, between care and self-erasure, between patience and self-abandonment, between love and the fear of being the one who lets go first. And sometimes, letting go first is not rejection, it is recognition. It is the moment you see that waiting has become a habit, not a virtue. It is the moment you stop confusing emotional labor with intimacy. It is the moment you realize that your peace has been sitting on the other side of a boundary you kept postponing. You do not need to become hard to do this. Hardness is just another mask. What you need is a steadier loyalty. Loyalty to your own perception. Loyalty to your own nervous system. Loyalty to the part of you that has been quietly asking for relief. The phone may still be silent tonight, or it may not. That is no longer the center of the story. The center is you, standing back inside your own life, no longer translating someone else's uncertainty into a job description for your heart. And if he ever meets you again in a clearer state, he will meet a woman who is no longer willing to disappear into the fog with him. If he does not, you will still have done something far more important than waiting. You will have returned to yourself. My silence is not a game. It is my return to myself. Keep that sentence close, not as a threat, not as a performance. As a reminder that your clarity is not too much, your boundary is not cruelty, and your life is not meant to be spent carrying what was never yours to hold. The silent phone can stay on the table. You do not have to stay inside it.